another edition of Your Month in Review, the show where we do it live. Very special Black Holiday Thanksgiving weekend edition. First of all, happy Thanksgiving to everybody. I hope everyone had a wonderful time with their families. Andy Fancher, unfortunately, got stuck with my family. We're going to have him on in just a bit to relive that trauma. We don't know if he'll ever be the same after spending a Thanksgiving with the Volks family, but we'll hear from him later in the show. I am joined now by our research director, Jen Wood, our special projects director, Dylan Nolan, who produces this show. So much to cover. It was a crazy, crazy month of November here at FITSNews. And I want to start with a case that just continues to dominate headlines across the country, certainly here in South Carolina. The Murdoch murder saga. Every time we think this story is over, it comes back in some form or fashion. Attorney Dick Harpootlian once said it was like an STD, just never goes away. But, you know, Jen, when we got Hulu miniseries and we got the South Carolina Supreme Court scheduling a date for this high-profile Murdoch appeal, we kind of got to talk about it. Am I right?
Yep, it's kind of hard not to.
And then in addition to all that, we had a huge Murdoch-related interview this month that we're going to talk about extensively on the show. But first, I want to go back to the legal side of this because, Jen, to me, that's where most of the real drama is right now. And we got a date this month from the South Carolina Supreme Court, February 11, 2026. They're going to hear Alex Murdoch's appeal.
Yep, they're going to have oral arguments. I mean, I knew it was coming, but that felt soon to me. I was surprised.
Yeah, we've been here in spring. And obviously that's a little bit ahead of the curve. But as we look at this appeal that's coming forward, obviously all the written arguments are in. There's nothing that can be submitted on the record at this point. So essentially, what's going to happen on February 11 is attorneys for Murdoch and attorneys for the office of Alan Wilson, South Carolina Attorney General, they're going to appear before the court and they're going to deliver oral arguments on these two narratives. And Jen, you've done a great job breaking down these narratives. Walk us through real quick. What's the general theme that the defense, Alex Murdoch's attorneys, are putting forward versus what the state is arguing?
You know, I think their biggest argument is the jury tampering by former clerk of court Becky Hill. They're saying that, basically because of her conversations with jurors about the case, that he did not get a fair trial. And the states countered back that, there was overwhelming evidence of his guilt. I don't know how those two things play hand in hand, but those are the key arguments. There are other evidentiary appeal aspects that have been brought up by the defense, but I do think that the jury tampering is the biggest point of contention, probably their strongest point in this appeal.
Well, let's back that up though, Jen, because you said that the state is making the case that there is overwhelming evidence of Alex Murdoch's guilt. Well, let's talk about that because we got no murder weapons. We've got nothing other than this Kindle video that puts him at the scene of the murders approximately 5 minutes before they happened, which he lied about extensively and continued to lie about during his trial. So we know the guy's a lying liar, obviously, and we know he was somewhere he said he wasn't, but overwhelming evidence of the actual murders.
Yeah. Right. So for that to be what they are countering back with on the jury tampering, that these foolish and fleeting comments made by Becky Hill, it doesn't matter because there was overwhelming evidence of his guilt. But to me, I think it's a very strange argument.
Right. What else are they going to argue?
Well, they did look, let's give it up for the prosecutors. They made a compelling case. All of the attorneys on Alan Wilson's team who argued that trial, once they were allowed to present all this evidence of Murdoch's financial crimes, and once they got all that in, they did a great job of laying out the case. And in fact, I think all of us, as we were there at the end of that trial, we said, well, yeah, we would have voted to convict him.
Correct. Correct.
And then add to that the fact that this guy was literally on the stand, trapped in a lie, as he was testifying. That was sort of one of those Okay,
I think
dude.
Alex's testimony sealed his conviction, but I believe that the prosecutors, given the evidence they presented, would have been able to secure a conviction even if he didn't take the stand and, liar, liar, pants on fire for a day straight.
You think they would have?
Yes, I believe that most people would see him lying to law enforcement about his whereabouts at the time that his wife and son were murdered and say, all right, I mean, that's enough for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the jury tampering, though, I think, Jen, is a little more cut and dried than the evidence of the murder, because you've got, obviously, one of the jurors said, yes, there was tampering, and not only was there tampering, but it impacted my decision. 3 other jurors confirmed that there was tampering. They said it didn't impact their decision, but that's a quarter of the jury
Right.
basically saying it was tampered with. And then in addition to that, since then, we've had one of the jurors come out and say the thing was rigged, was actually rigged. So a lot of questions about that Murdoch jury. And I think when we get into whether or not that was proven or not, I think the evidentiary hearing that was held back in January of last year, it was pretty conclusive from where I sat, that you got people on the stand testifying, hey, this happened. And then the former Chief Justice of South Carolina said, well, yes, but we don't think it rises to the level of him getting a new trial. Jen, the state Supreme Court's going to have a real problem reconciling that with the record from that appellate hearing, aren't they?
I think so. I mean, I really do. And I mean, I know what's going to happen? No. Do I know what I think should happen? Yes. And if they were to deny his appeal, I think they've got a really good case at the federal level.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that's going to be the real question, is whatever happens at the state level. Obviously, if he gets a new trial at the state level, then here we go. 2.0 Murdoch double homicide trial of the century, version number 2. We won't know where they're going to hold it until that gets announced. But if he loses at the state level, the U.S. Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, which has ruled on the cases that are directly involved in his appeal already, they're going to get a shot at. And Jen, I think he's got a pretty good shot before the U.S. Fourth Circuit, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I really do.
Well, tons of people have been talking about Murdoch this month, and the reason, let's go ahead and put it out there. The reason is the Hulu miniseries, Death in the Family. This has been wildly popular on Hulu, right? I almost said Netflix. That was the documentary. I always forget. I'll forget my streaming services, but it's been a hugely popular series. Tons of folks have been tuning into that. And in fact, I've gotten many comments about my character on the show, who, by the way, does not rock the proper hat. That's what really pissed me off. All the people talking about the factual inaccuracies of this show. This is the proper hat. Okay. Get it right, Hulu. But at any rate, it has sparked a huge renewal of interest in the case. And in fact, one of the big books that we've been following recently came out. I think it came out kind of targeted with the release of this Hulu thing. And some of the existing books that are out there, several over my shoulder right here, they've been seeing boosts in sales as a result of this miniseries. But the book that I'm talking about that got released this month, Blanca Simpson's book, and Jen Wood, we went to go see Blanca this month.
We did
an extended sit down with her, and she's done a number of different interviews, but I really feel like our conversation with her was one where we really kind of got to hear a lot more from her, her perspective, not only on that miniseries, but she dropped a bomb on us during that interview, didn't she?
She did. And I you did a really, really good job interviewing her. I think you gave her time to think about her answers. This isn't her, this isn't normal for her, to be in front of the cameras. And, I think I've watched a lot of the interviews she's done while she's been promoting her book, and people do have a tendency to cut her off and kind of focus on more salacious aspects of her book. But I think you really got into her relationship with the Murdochs. I thought you did a great job.
It's my calming disposition.
Yes.
I put people at ease, Jen Wood.
So I think, I mean, but it was fascinating to hear from her perspective, because she was so close to the Murdochs, all of them, especially Maggie.
And I think people assume because Blanca was a housekeeper for the Murdochs that, that she's been doing that kind of work her whole life, but actually she's a Navy veteran and she was also an investigator, criminal investigator. So she's kind of the perfect person to be deep embedded within this family and to have an analytical perspective in the aftermath of a crime like this. And I think that's why I think one of the highlights of this interview is when she speaks about noticing the towel sitting on the driver's seat of Alex's Suburban when she was reviewing Officer Green's body camera footage. And she says, I laundered this towel. And that to me was proof that he went in the house and cleaned himself up. And that's when she saw that, she knew that the state's theory that he was involved in the homicide was accurate. You can't set that aside. But what was interesting is she mentioned that prosecutors weren't very interested when she told them about this and noticing this.
And that was surprising to me. I don't know about you, Jen, but when she told us that it took them an extended amount of time, over a week, to even sit down with her, somebody who was literally one of the last people to see these folks alive, somebody who was a part of their daily lives.
I mean, she cooked their final meals. I mean, she
Yeah.
was at the house that day.
What's interesting is this case was not taken over by the South Carolina Attorney General's office for a number of months. I wonder if this was, and we need to talk to her again to figure out this timeline of exactly when she reached out, when she saw this video. But was it under Duffy Stone? Was the prosecution still under Duffy Stone at that point?
I think what she told me, she saw the video and noticed the towel during the actual trial.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So I can understand why prosecutors, I mean, at that point, they have their roadmap.
Right.
But this is almost, I mean, if they had gotten this information early enough, if they had sat down with her and reviewed this with her at the beginning, this is almost another Kennel video in how dispositive it is of his involvement in the crime.
And not only the fact he was in there, but the fact he also set up the his wife's pajamas on her bed, folded them to make it look like she had been in there. I mean, it was, so he was, trying to basically set up this backstory, if she's to be believed. The other thing that's very interesting about the interview with Blanca, and we're getting ready to get to the bombshell, but the other thing I thought that was interesting before we get to that was she talked about how she felt that these rumors about Maggie and Alex's marriage falling apart, that she had gone to see a divorce lawyer. She really pushed back against that. Talked about them acting like a high school couple, like they were always going on dates, going to movies in the middle of the day. I mean, she painted a very, to use Dick Harpootlian's word, convivial portrait of this relationship between Alec and Maggie. And I thought that was interesting too, because that's not what you see in the Hulu series at all, is it, Jen?
It is not at all what you see. And she was very sure of that. She said, when the kids both went off to school and were not in the house anymore, that they really seemed to, that they spend all their time together. If he was going somewhere, she was going. I thought that was really interesting because that is, just not something you have seen in any of this.
Yeah. Well, Jen, I want to get to the bombshell she dropped, because you were there during this interview. Dylan, you were there. We were just talking about the crime. We were talking about whether or not she thought he had help, because that's one of the big theories here is, okay, maybe he was part of this, but certainly somebody else had to help him, because, I mean, I don't know, Alec Murdoch is not as smooth a criminal. I think it's pretty clear, but the theory is, well, did he have someone help him do it? Or did he have someone help him cover it up after the fact? Or maybe even an accomplice before the fact, an accessory before the fact? We put that question to Blanca Jen Wood, and boy, did she have an answer. You got that clip,
Yep.
Jen? Let's roll it.
And do you think he had help?
I do.
Really?
I do.
I got to ask the next question. Who do you think helped him?
I will not disclose that.
For reasons of?
My safety.
Yeah.
My safety. I know who they are.
You do?
I do. I know
you
who
know
they
who
are.
Helped Alec Murdoch murder?
I believe I know who they are. Yes. I do.
That leads to my next question.
Hmm.
You have been critical of the investigation into these murders. Tell me, what is your main concern with how these murders were investigated? And would you, if questioned, share your suspicions?
I I would, of course I would. I mean, there's no, I'm not, I wasn't trying to be too critical of that. And I think in our small communities, we don't have that type of crime per se. From especially, a family such as theirs. You don't, you've never seen something like that. And I think there was too many people trying to solve the crime right when it happened. Um, and I believe that needs to be addressed, um, especially some of the younger rookie officers. That I know they were trying to do their job, and I know they were, you know, being told what they needed to do and all that, and that's fine. But even
So yeah. So she knows who it is, and she's willing to tell law enforcement.
Yep.
So there was some confusion. I do want to make this clear to our audience watching this, just as we did in our recap of that interview and as we did on last week's weekend review show. Blanca and her co-author on her new book made very clear that they were referring to Alex Murdoch receiving assistance covering up the crime. They were not saying that there was a second shooter or that someone else helped him commit the crime, although I think that's very much still in the realm of possibility.
Right.
However, she was referring specifically to, again, according to her words, direct knowledge of a co-conspirator and helping him cover that crime up. And again, in South Carolina, if you were an accessory before the fact, if you were an accessory after the fact, and you are criminally charged, you are facing the same time as though you committed the murders with your own hands. So that's something that is worth following. And we're going to follow up too. We've been kind of all over the AG's office this past month. He was before the South Carolina Senate for an oversight hearing. We were pretty aggressive in our coverage of that and in the aftermath of that hearing. So we're going to be pretty aggressive in following up with the AG's office on this too, because Jen, if there is a retrial, Blanca Simpson is handing some ammo.
Yeah, to the defense.
In a huge way. I mean, this retrial would be off the rails if all this is going to come into play.
Yeah, I mean, I already think if there were to be a retrial, it would be a completely different trial because I do think, the defense would make some decisions differently, like having Eddie Smith come in and testify and, looking into some of these broader drug connection theories.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with you. And the other part of this interview that I want to get into, Jim, before we move off of the Murdochs real quick, is Blanca's best friend. And this was part of this process I thought was really cool because we not only got to sit down and have this incredible conversation with her, but when it was over, we got to go hang out with Bubba, the famous dog. And you got some pictures. There he is.
It was so cool to meet this dog that everybody had been, talking about during the trial. And, basically, I think was probably one of the keys to Alex's conviction.
Yeah, he was. This is, of course, the dog that got loose in the minutes before the murders, got a chicken in his mouth, was running around. There he is, running around all over the place there at Moselle near the kennels. And it was Bubba with the chicken that led to Alex Murdoch's voice being heard, calling after that dog. And that put him at the scene of the murders literally minutes before they took place. So
and Bubba's, Bubba's 12 years old now. He is old. He is, blind, has a myriad of health issues. But, he was just the sweetest boy. But, you could see glimpses of, the rascal he was back at Moselle.
The guinea destroyer.
It's a chicken, Dylan. It's not a guinea.
Oh, he was getting both out there.
Yeah, it was really cool that she decided to help take care of him. And, I think it was Buster Murdoch that connected with her because he had one of the dogs from down there. And this was Maggie's dog. Yeah, Bubba was Maggie's dog. And so given how close she was to Maggie Murdoch. That was the other part I thought about this book, Jen Wood, that was different from all the other versions. We really heard from someone who was close to Maggie.
Yeah, and that was something, Maggie's friends and her family, I think they didn't talk about her much. And I think that's, just I honestly think it was out of respect for her. So she was the one person on all of this. You never really got a good sense of, her. And this was the first time I really felt like I did.
I've had a lot of conversations about the Hulu show, and folks have talked about, okay, we know the actor that's playing Alex is doing a good job because we've seen so many hours of Alex, but to play Maggie or to write Maggie, I mean, that's near impossible because we or, any writer has no idea who the real Maggie was. From listening to, the hours of conversations that I've had with people that know her or people that knew people who know her, over the years, I believe that the Hulu played her darker than she actually was. I think that she was a Southern woman of her social class, which is to say not somebody with like a dark, Carmela Soprano kind of. I don't know if Hulu nailed it on that, but also I can't really blame them for not nailing it because they have so little to work with.
Well, and that's the problem that we encounter with this sort of cottage industry that's sprung up in the aftermath of this crime. When I think Valerie Borline's book, for example, the first draft of that, they were like, hey, you got to put some heroes in here because this is just too dark, And so I think people start creating these narratives at the expense of what actually happened.
And there was a lot of people who got mad at Blanca in our comments, saying, how dare she talk about the light side of the Murdoch family? But I think that was a very real reaction to, I mean, Alex didn't fool everybody for decades because he was some on the surface evil schemer. He was able to get away with these crimes for so long because that is the opposite of the Alex that everybody who testified in that trial got on the stand and said that they knew. Now, obviously, if you're Alex's law partner and you say, oh, well, he did seem pretty shady, that's probably not going to make you look great when he was, committing fraud on books that you had access to for years. But I take her point that this was not the Alex that anybody knew until it all came crumbling down.
I mean, and I talked to a lot of people that knew Alec, and everybody was. A lot of people were blindsided by this. I mean, he and I think that is a really important part of the story.
Well, no, let's actually rewind it further than that, because 2 days after these murders, we were the first media outlet to report that this guy was a person of interest in the double homicide. And the reaction to that was, in South Carolina anyway, what the hell? How dare you? I mean, half the frickin' trial lawyer lobby was texting me, you're lying, this is fake news. And of course, Alec Murdoch, while he was committing these egregious frauds against some of the most vulnerable victims, he was the head of the frickin' State Trial Lawyers Association here in South Carolina. So he was fooling a lot of people. That's an excellent point, Dylan. But yeah, as we move forward, obviously the big news this month was the release of this miniseries on Hulu and the discussion it generated, particularly our discussion with Blanca. But the big news moving forward, Jen, is going to be that February 11 date before the South Carolina Supreme Court. We will be there covering every word of it. We'll bring every word of it to you on FITSNews.com. So be on the lookout for, again, more twists and turns in this saga that just seems to never end.
And before we get off the Murdoch topic, if anybody wants to watch this Hulu miniseries, Hulu is running a great Black Friday deal, but they are not the only ones running a Black Friday deal. We here at FITSNews, you can get a whole year for 50% off. It's the best deal we run all year. Promo code FITSGIVING, FITSGIVING. It's all one word.
You just triggered Andy again. FITSGIVING. 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 And yes, that's right. 50% off a subscription to FITSNews.com if you get it before midnight on Monday. So you got this whole weekend and Cyber Monday to get that 50% off on your annual subscription. And by the way, we appreciate everybody who does that, whether or not getting one for themselves or gifting one to a friend or family member. Those subscriptions empower all this, everything that we do here, all the investigations, all the reporting, all of it is empowered by those subscriptions. As we look from one case that has a lot of questions to another case that has a lot of questions, shifting gears to the story of David Aylor. This was another one that had some big news this month, Jen, and you covered it in depth. The first charges filed in connection with the 2023 death of David Aylor, prominent Charleston, South Carolina attorney, a guy who was very connected politically, very connected in the judiciary, maybe very connected to some other folks that we're starting to uncover as we dig into this. But this was a death, again, January 2nd, 2023, that shocked South Carolina, the Low Country in particular, where David built his legal empire. This was a death that just shook people. This was just a lovable guy, life of the party. Everybody loved him. And so his death of a fentanyl overdose, by the way, that's another story we took a ton of grief for. We were the first outlet to report that he died from a fentanyl overdose. And once again, it was like the same thing with Murdoch. How dare you, whatever. Well, not only is that what killed him, but there is now charges filed in connection with the fentanyl that killed him. And Jen, it was one of the people closest to him.
Yeah,
who has been charged.
Yeah, his cousin, and he also worked in his firm as an investigator, was charged federally in connection with his death, specifically with providing the drugs that directly caused his death.
We'll say his name, Levi Miles.
Levi Miles. Sorry, I didn't even realize I missed his name.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, it's just a sad turn in this case. But the bigger question is this it? Because we have had, over the past 2 years, so many people say like this is much bigger than than people think.
Well, and they're right, because when this first went down, David Aylor's cell phone was something of a hot potato. It ended up in the U.S. Attorney's Office up in Florence, South Carolina, much to the chagrin of many prominent Low Country lawyers and politicos and others. But this was a phone with a lot of secrets on it, Jen Wood. A lot of secrets.
Right.
And so, there was a debate for weeks over who was going to be the special master to go through that thing and make sure there were no attorney-client communications that were improperly leaked. But Jen, I want you to give a little background on the timing of David's death, because this took place, as we mentioned, January 2nd, 2023, but less than 3 weeks earlier, there was a significant development in a case involving David Aylor. Walk us through what happened just 3 weeks before he died.
So it began the summer before he died. He was defending a defendant in a federal criminal case. And I believe it was August, the federal attorney's office filed a motion, basically a rule to show cause, basically saying that Aylor or somebody from Aylor's law firm had leaked sealed discovery to the defendant. And this basically, the defendant gave it to one of his co-conspirators, and it ended up in the jail. And some witnesses, for this prosecution were threatened, and they actually caused a threat to a federal prosecutor, which, it was an absolute mess. But in all of this actually resolved 3 weeks before he died in federal court, where they came to an agreement that David Aylor was not going to be representing this person anymore, had returned any funds he received for representing him, and no formal sanctions were sought. And then he dies I think that was December 18th, if I remember correctly. He dies January 2nd.
And it's worth pointing out that you mentioned it was not David Aylor personally who left these materials in this jail. It was an investigator in his office. And
it doesn't say the investigator's name, but as far as I could tell, Levi Miles was the only investigator. So, can't say for certain, but I do think that is interesting.
And that's one of the many red flags here. And then we go to some of the politically connected attorneys that were close to Aylor. who have run into trouble with the law in the aftermath of this. We look at Bentley Price, the judge who was booted from the bench, not for anything related to the David Aylor case, as far as we know, but this was a guy. Bentley Price was at the scene, one of the first people to be on the scene after David Aylor died. Very close friend of his, and in fact, we'd published reports prior to this about some questionable dealings involving attorneys that were close to Price, close to Aylor. Some of these same people they rolled and sat with, Jen. But
yes, I've been really going for as soon as this charge and plea deal was announced for Levi Miles, I really started digging into that federal case that led that Aylor was involved in the months leading up to his death, and I've already found some very, very interesting connections.
Well, before we get into that, and I don't want to get too deep into that because I know you're still investigating. We've got a lot of stuff we got to connect, but talking about Levi Miles, there's a lot of cooperation that he's going to have to provide to federal authorities. You mentioned polygraphs. We talked about testimony forfeiture, all sorts of things that Levi Miles has to do in connection with his agreement, because they basically could have set him up for 20 years, but not set him up. Let me phrase that
like
better.
Mandatory.
Yeah. He could have been facing 20 years, as this was a situation where death resulted from these drugs. But instead of that, he's potentially facing a much lower term. Jen, is that correct?
Yeah. So and I think that shows it's very indicative that he is a cooperating defendant, and this likely is not the end of the story.
Yeah. Well, and it's frightening to look at what you uncovered back in the early days of the Murdoch investigation. In fact, one of the first stories you worked on at FITSNews, which was one of the ones we were a little hesitant when we started seeing where it went, but we published it anyway. Screw it, right? You only go around this thing one time, but yeah, we published it. And some of those connections between Alec Murdoch and Barrett Bowler and his connections to some of the gentleman smugglers that brought the cocaine in, that built the Low Country. I mean, a lot of people don't know that Low Country was built on cocaine, people.
Could still be being built on it. I mean,
but they're moving. Yeah, those gentlemen smugglers moved a lot of product, and some of those same networks, Jen.
I'm seeing a lot of trends. We'll just say that.
Well, we're going to keep digging on it, because it's one of those things that, again, a lot of mainstream media won't touch this. They won't touch it. And a lot of the prosecutors and a lot of the investigators just won't go there. And some days I look at this stuff and see how deep it goes, and I don't blame them. But then other days it's like, well, who the hell's going to do it, right?
Well, I was with my brother today in a coin shop, and a customer in there was like, I just like on the side of, having a conversation. He goes, "This state is so corrupt." I cracked up. I'm like, yeah.
But they're right. I mean, just look at all, like, they hadn't prosecuted Becky Hill in the Murdoch case. They hadn't prosecuted Curtis Eddie Smith in the Murdoch case. They didn't look at the bigger drug networks. And now we got this case with David Aylor, and we hear the feds are casting a wide net from our sources in Charleston. We hear that they're going after the roots of this thing, but we don't know.
Right. It remains to be seen.
Yeah. Well, there was another big case, Jen, that broke some big news this month. It's a case that you have been point on for us, and I'm referring to the wrongful death case involving Scott Spivey, a North Carolina insurance adjuster who was gunned down in September of 2023 on a highway off of a highway just south of the North Carolina border. Now, the Office of Attorney General Alan Wilson has looked at this case and determined that it was an incident where stand your ground applied. That's, of course, the South Carolina Protection of Persons and Property Act, which allows people to use deadly force in the event they believe their life is at risk. And Jen, this is a case, as we saw in a Conway, South Carolina courtroom this month. This is a case that has generated a lot of discussion on podcasts, on the TikTok, all over the place. And we witnessed some of the arguments back and forth in that case in Conway this week. We are gearing up for what's going to be a pretty significant hearing in this case, whether or not the two defendants in this case, Weldon Boyd and Kenneth Williams, whether or not they will be able to avail themselves of this protection.
Right.
Jen, what are the key arguments in this Scott Spivey case?
So, I mean, I think this is going to be a really fascinating hearing. It's, by all accounts, should be happening mid-December. There may be some delays, but the Judge Griffith, he's very insistent that he wants to keep this case moving. Right now, we are looking at the hearing that we just attended. I believe it was last week. We were talking about the discovery in that case. And what is going to be allowed in as the judge considers the evidence. And this is one of those cases that has, there's a lot of factors coming together, including, a horrible investigation by Horry County, which, it uncovered a lot of corruption. There have been people, fired from Horry County related to this investigation directly. But right now, as it stands, the facts of the case, the Attorney General says nothing he has seen evidentiary wise has changed his determination that this was a justified shooting. So now we're looking at the civil immunity, whether or not they can be held accountable in the wrongful death case. And one of the biggest points of contention in this hearing were the 911 calls made by various witnesses, specifically the two witnesses that the defense says witnessed the actual shooting on Camp Swamp Road. So the defense wants these 911 calls in, but the witnesses, these two witnesses, have stopped communicating with the legal teams on both sides. I think, by all accounts, they've had it with
I don't blame them.
Publicity that this case has brought.
I don't blame them. They got sucked into this podcast toxicity. I don't blame them for not wanting to be part of it.
Yeah, an absolute vortex. So whether or not these call recordings could be admitted without the individuals who made the calls to be there to testify, to provide context. And that is what the judge is currently considering. The defense feels they should be able to admit them, and the prosecutor, the plaintiff side, led by Mark Tinsley, believes that these witnesses need to be there to testify. But the witnesses are just done, and they all live. I mean, an important part of that is both of these witnesses, these key witnesses, live out of state. So sending them a subpoena to come testify isn't quite as cut and dry. You can't really do that. So yeah, I thought it was a really interesting hearing. I don't know where it's going to go, but that is kind of the last step before we get the stand your ground hearing.
Yeah, and we got to credit the judge, Eugene Griffith, the judge in this case. I thought he did a really good job of bringing those lawyers back, because there were some very heated, there's some vitriol in that courtroom. And I thought Judge Griffith did a great job of bringing it back and saying, hey, guys, I don't care. I don't care whose fault it was.
We got to make every effort to get these witnesses in here to make them know that we will keep them safe. And he's like, at this point, it doesn't matter we have to try to get them here and figure out what we're going to do if not.
Indeed.
Very calm demeanor, and he did a great job of keeping it moving.
And I also want to point out here, we were a little critical of the Attorney General earlier in the show, Alan Wilson, but I do want to give him some credit here. His office, in the face of all the political pressure based on this case and their criminal determination that stand your ground did apply, I got to give him credit. He has sent a letter to South Carolina 7th Circuit Solicitor Barry Barnett. And in that letter, he basically said, look, I'm sending you this case. And when I say this case, we're referring in large part to the corruption investigation into the Horry County Police Department, which did, again, as you mentioned, an absolutely terrible job here. And as you mentioned, 2 folks have already lost their jobs. More may lose their jobs, and some may face criminal charges in connection with that botched investigation. But Wilson, to his credit, told Barry Barnett, hey, look at the stand your ground aspect of this too. Go over my work. Check our findings. If you think we messed it up, ball's in your court. And I think that's pretty impressive, because to me, it shows a lot of confidence in the determination that they reached in the Attorney General's office regarding this being a stand your ground. And again, I don't know exactly what they based it on. We haven't seen all the files. I think the prosecutors are the only ones that have seen all the files. but they must be confident in that determination to say to another prosecutor, hey, check our work. You make your call.
Right. And I think not just the confidence, but the willingness to hand it over if there is something found that changes that. I think that was a smart move because he has taken a lot of heat over this case.
We're going to talk later in the show about the candidate who has given the most heat on that, Nancy Mace, but that's for a whole nother segment. So we're going to hold off on Nancy Mace for a minute. But Jen, you've done amazing work on the Scott Spivey thing, watching you during that hearing. And I know I mentioned this on the show last week, but just your impartiality, just the facts, the way that you have covered this case has just been amazing, particularly considering one of the attorneys is suing us at the moment. But you've done a great job of just breaking it down. And that's the discipline, that's how we do it here. We're going to cover the facts wherever they go. Just because you're an asshole doesn't mean you're wrong, right?
Right.
Just because you're a good person doesn't mean you're right. So, okay. But I want to bring in the man, Andy Fancher. We've been talking about him. We talked about him at the intro. The man who survived a folks family Thanksgiving, all the kids. There he is, lived to tell the tale. Andy, I got to ask you, you've been in some tough joints in your life. You've seen some crazy things. Does any of it compare to my kids going nuts on Thanksgiving?
I will tell you, I learn a lot from a lot of different places. I did not expect such a crash course on Harry Potter, and which we were talking Harry Potter shop earlier, which dormitory I'm apparently a part of. And although your daughter agreed that I belonged in the Hufflepuff, this is completely out of my jurisdiction, y'all. Dylan told me that was not a good place to be. So I'm learning some literally some new worlds this week.
Those kids played you, Andy. They played you. Well, man, I wanted to bring you in, Andy, our lead investigative reporter, who is this has been an amazing year. Andy, you have broke some just unbelievable stories, and your reporting instrumental in bringing down one of the longest serving, most powerful, most politically influential lawmen in the entire state of South Carolina, former Sheriff Charles Wright. And Andy Fancher, I'm going to be honest, if it were not for you and your reporting, I don't know if we'd have a former in front of his name right now. But I know you wanted to talk about something that you uncovered while you were investigating up in Spartanburg County, the story of Caroline Lake. Andy, walk us through this story.
Sure. I obviously want to take a somber tone for a moment to talk about this case that keeps resurfacing in my conversations on the decades of alleged crime and corruption tied to the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office, both during as well as before Chuck Wright took office, which would have been in 2004 or 2005, depending on how you look at it. And that particular case, which has been highlighted by sources on both sides of law enforcement, is the unsolved murder of Anna Caroline Lake. The 1988 James F. Burns High School graduate, and there's her senior yearbook photo, was last seen alive, leaving her grandparents' home on or about her 20th birthday, which would have been August 28th, 1990. It's worth noting this petite brunette did not come from the best home life. In fact, at the time of her disappearance, she was living with her grandparents, Edwin Lake, a former state legislator, and Sarah Lee Hughes Lake, a public school teacher at DR Hill Middle School. And by all accounts, from folks that have reached out this week, those grandparents were wonderful people who cared not only for Caroline, but for her two older siblings as well. Now, this is kind of where the ice wears thin on what I'm able to say, is I obviously cannot take what people are saying about her death at face value. But what I can say, as we see here, is that her skeletal remains were found more than 2 years after she was reported missing off a wooded cul-de-sac in Welford, South Carolina. That is, of course, in Spartanburg County. Then County Coroner Jim Burnett told reporters at the time that when he found her bones, vines were growing through them. They were scattered about 30 feet. We had a 30-foot crime scene, or at least in that specific region. And I believe there's a picture, if we could pull up that wooded area where I visited just over the weekend. That is where the story ends for Caroline Lake, right there in that photograph. She was found, obviously, in this stretch of tree line, just a short distance from where her 79 Corolla was located at the onset of her missing persons case. Now, what's so integral about this patch of trees here is that this discovery of her weathered bones in January of 93 would be the last sizable development in what quickly became one of the least talked about and least publicized cold cases in Spartanburg County. From what I've gathered, the last time her name made any at least searchable headline was in 1999, literally when I was born, meaning there have been no A&E specials, no cold case podcasts, and most importantly, no impassioned plea from the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office, despite a previous administration being intimately familiar with that middle Tiger region of Spartanburg County at a specific time when Caroline Lake lived and died. So I appreciate everybody listening to my impassioned plea here. I, just as from Monday as now, I'm imploring anyone with any photographs, any memories, or any information at all, even rumor regarding Caroline Lake's life and subsequent death, to please reach out to me directly. You can do so at andy@fitsnews.com, as well as any of my socials at Real Andy Fancher. That's X, Facebook, and Instagram.
Andy, you mentioned a moment ago that we can't really attribute, any basis in fact to some of the theories that you're hearing about this unsolved case. But as you are investigating it, let me ask you the question this way. Obviously, this is a homicide. Are you seeing anything that would lead you to believe that some of the folks we've covered were involved, that some of the folks we've covered have covered this up? I mean, do you believe that there is a backstory here involving local law enforcement?
That's a good question. In fact, when we had kicked out our post this week titled "Who Killed Caroline Lake?", I sent it to some of the sources who've been helping us out on this case. And one former deputy sent me a text back and said, I don't understand. And then he texted me about an hour later and he said, oh, I see it now. So I'm not implying anything. I'm not suggesting anything. But for folks familiar with the Duncan, Lyman, Startex, Welford region of Spartanburg County, and I want to emphasize that Spartanburg County, especially Welford, ain't that big. I trust they will read between the lines. But again, all I can do is ask the public to contact me with what they know. And by God's grace, they did this week. We have connected with several folks who I foresee being integral to future coverage of Caroline Lake. But I just find it so awfully interesting that in talking on the alleged corruption that has persisted in Spartanburg County for decades, for some reason, one of the least publicized homicide cases kept coming up, and it keeps coming up. So that's my impassioned plea.
Well, before we pivot real quick to the rundown of all the badges gone bad this past month, real quick, I do want to give a shout out to our good friend Justin Bamberg, the People's Representative Bamberg from Bamberg, where he's from, Got the name. They named the place after him. That's how badass Justin Bamberg is. But no, I want to thank him because his law firm has sponsored our Unsolved Carolinas coverage for this whole year, and we've been able to tell dozens of stories of folks who've gone missing, and like Andy said, they've slipped off the front pages, and a lot of folks have forgotten these stories, and we were able to keep them going. So I want to thank Justin Bamberg and Bamberg Legal for their help in doing that. But Andy, let's go through this crash course, man. There's some bad behaving cops this month, man. Take it away, brother.
Right after again getting the somber moment out of the way, we can definitely take a look and laugh at the carousel of literal badges gone bad this month, just like the month before that and the month before that. Data. You get the picture. In fact, we had the final closing of a badge gone bad chapter in the county where the story never ends, Spartanburg County, where we had retired Sergeant Alan Wood, who we had previously identified as having been the epicenter of a porn disseminating scandal at the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office. He was finally let go this week, albeit under a new sheriff, Sheriff Bill Ryan, who took office just earlier this month. Even after we kicked out the troves of very explicit pornographic material that he was sending for months and months. Chuck Wright kept that man employed, but I guess you would too if you started at the sheriff's office in the 1980s with the good old boys. What is a good old boy to do if not be good to your fellow good old boy? So nonetheless, we saw the end of Alan Wood, which again was a long time coming, but to the new
Literally.
wave, literally. So as far as it relates to the new wave of badges gone bad, where do we start? Chad Walker. Now, this gentleman is, of course, still wearing a badge and a gun. I didn't find out about Chad Walker until hyper-focusing on the South Congaree Police Department, which is a case study and a half. For those who recognize this man's name, it's likely because he made national headlines in 2020 for shouting the N-word multiple times while employed with Columbia PD. Evidently, he didn't cut it out for Columbia PD, Chief Skip Holbrook, but he was apparently perfect material for Springdale Police Department, which is where he is currently employed. Again, I would not have found out about Chad Walker had it not been for former South Congaree Police Chief Stephen Jonas. Now, Stephen Jonas here made headlines this month again because South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson just declined to prosecute the former police chief following an investigation into allegations of excessive force. That investigation was requested by the Lexington County Sheriff's Department, just like the investigation into Wayne LaBounty. Mr. LaBounty, Trooper Duper here, just recently filed a lawsuit against LCSD, suggesting or accusing one of their deputies of negligence that resulted in Mr. LaBounty being hospitalized and subsequently receiving at-home care. Well, as of this publishing, he is now accused of attempting to rape one of his in-home caregivers. That investigation is now being handled by the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. But it would not be a carousel of badges gone bad without ending where we started, which is here with a photograph of South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson standing next to J. Ross Ritchie. He is the former Belton police chief turned former Anderson police officer who resigned amid a, just like the fellows before him, investigation into allegations of excessive force. What I find so striking about Mr. Ritchie's investigation, however, is that it appears to have occurred, at least this allegation, the incident of this alleged excessive force, appears to have occurred in 2020. So why we're going 5 years back to hyper focus on the alleged misconduct of this gentleman remains unclear. I can tell you that the investigation into Mr. Ritchie was requested by 10th Circuit Solicitor Micah Black. And if that name rings a bell to any of our readers familiar with Chuck Wright, that is the same solicitor that declined to prosecute any and all state-level charges against Chuck Wright. So as we can see, a cabal of I will not cuss, but quite the cabal here in South Carolina. It's quite funny. As I was watching our show from the green room, I had kind of deduced from what y'all were saying that if I wanted to get away with wide scale crime, South Carolina is the place to do it.
Smiling
bigger the
faces,
better.
beautiful places, and yeah, carte blanche to lie, cheat, and steal. Here you go.
Well, if you know the right people.
That's for sure. And Andy, I want to point out your reference there to the local solicitor failing to press charges at the state level against Chuck Wright is significant, because if anybody thinks that man is not in line for a pardon from the White House, look at Donald Trump's previous pardons. I think Chuck Wright is in line for one of those pardons. So the fact there are no state charges is significant.
And if I may add one note here, something that I can't report in as much detail as I would like to for the time being. In accordance with the Chuck Wright vortex being the story that literally never ends, we now have a new character in the vortex, which is seriously, I kid y'all not, a newly minted federal fugitive of Islamic background who, it sounds crazy, I hope y'all are sitting down, not only was in Chuck Wright's vortex for a period of time, but was also in the same vortex of that West Virginia sheriff that was just recently pardoned by Donald Trump.
Watch out, folks. I think those pardon odds for Chuck Wright just went up. And oh, by the way, look who Chuck Wright's attorney is, the former solicitor in that Seventh Circuit, Trey Gowdy. It is all who you know, isn't it? It is all who you know. But as we get into a little bit of a political tone here, I do want to bring everybody kind of in here to talk about who we were referencing earlier in the show, the erstwhile front runner for governor of South Carolina, Nancy Mace. It has been a wild month for the U.S. Congresswoman from the Charleston area. And it all started when FITSNews sent a Freedom of Information Act request to the Charleston Regional Airport Authority for incident reports regarding her arrival at that facility late last month. And this story blew up nicely, Jen Wood. But here's the thing. Did we blow this story up, or did Nancy Mace blow it up with her response, which I'm looking at my door hinges over here, and I the word unhinged comes to mind. I mean,
it's one of those stories where I don't think it would have been nearly as big if her response had been much different.
Yeah, she kind of went off the rails with it.
Yeah, and just kept going off the rails. It turned into a conspiracy against her. Whether or not she'll be able to prove that there was a massive conspiracy against her, I'm not entirely sure. Still waiting for it, but it was quite bizarre. Yeah,
and it was one of those things where a lot of folks really, I think, had been giving Nancy Mace the benefit of the doubt on a lot of this stuff, because people have been saying, Wes Donahue, a very prominent South Carolina strategist, he's been out there for better part of the last year, basically telling everyone who will listen that Nancy Mace is crazy. He's been saying that publicly, openly. He worked for her for a long period of time.
Yeah, just look at his Twitter.
And I would have these conversations with Wes because, Nancy was at FITSNews for a period of 5 years. It's been a while. It was back in 2008 to 2013.
That's proof that she's crazy.
Right, exactly. There's a few Fitz alumni who fit that bill, but
a couple on the call.
but we go back, and so I worked with her very closely. Never saw any of this. I mean, she's an incredibly adept marketer, as I recall. Did great things for FITSNews. Obviously, politically astute. She got herself elected to the South Carolina State House. Got herself elected to the U.S. Congress, beating an incumbent. By the way, very telegenic Democrat down there, Joe Cunningham. She knocked him out of office and then defeated a very well-funded Democrat challenger the following cycle. So somebody that's got a lot of political acumen, but this situation and this campaign that she's running for governor, it has been, again, unhinged. I got to go back to that word. I think Wes Donahue is correct. But Jen, she's fighting a two-front war, isn't she? Tell us a little bit about what you've covered this past month regarding the legal drama she's embroiled in.
So not only do we have her gubernatorial campaign, which is, you know, it's a roller coaster in and of itself. We also have the bevy of civil lawsuits going in Charleston County related to her scorched earth speech on the floor of the House of Representatives. And in that, you know, she accused a number of men, including her former fiance, Patrick Bryant, of sexual assault. I mean, also, I mean, it was a barn burner. And in the aftermath, there was a lawsuit filed by a Jane Doe in Charleston County against these individuals. That lawsuit is that's the one that has been heating up. I mean, I think in the past month we have seen some filings from Patrick Bryant, technically one of the defendants, that kind of shift the legal game. And one of those filings was a filing for a gag order in the case, and the judge ruled that they can no longer use Jane Doe pseudonyms in the case. So, it is with that filing for a gag order. We saw claims of his phone being hacked by Nancy Mace, fabricated evidence, political manipulation, and questioning where this video, this rape video, is that nobody has seen.
Well, they've seen still shots of it, and in fairness,
Right.
let's back this up, Jen. This all goes back to Nancy Mace's speech on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives back in February,
Right.
and that speech has redefined the South Carolina governor's race. It has spawned this entire just deluge of legal action that we've been covering, civil and criminal. There's an ongoing state law enforcement division investigation into the allegations that Nancy Mace has filed. This case has sparked civil lawsuits by Nancy Mace and victims against the men she accused. It has sparked lawsuits by some of the men she accused against Nancy Mace, one of which was thrown out in district court because apparently she had the protection of a sitting U.S. House member when she gave that speech. But this thing just opened the floodgates, this scorched earth speech. And so for a long time, Nancy Mace, I think, was really winning that legal battle. She was successful in federal court when they tried to sue her for libel. She was making strides in some of these other civil matters, getting rulings that were in her favor. But recently it feels, Jen, like the momentum has shifted against her.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think, and a lot of that is like in that gag order, they submitted, emails that she had sent to all of the legal teams that were, they were a tough read.
Yeah. Well, and she's kind of, I think that the theory that people say that she's operating on is the female Trump. She's just going to lean into everything. And I guess the question, I'll bring Dylan in here to try to answer this one too. That has worked for Trump for the most part. I mean, I think his numbers have taken a bit of a hit over the last couple of months, but by and large, leaning into things has worked for Donald Trump. The question is, can it work for somebody else? Can it work when that person is perhaps not quite as deliberative in their calculations? Dylan, what do you think about Mace's approach here of just leaning into all these controversies?
I mean, you say that Trump leans into everything, but I would say that he's a guy who will go hard in the paint, and then he message tests hard. I mean, he will completely 180 on any given issue if he's getting response back that is not what he wants to see. And I think that if you're going to go really, head over heels in on something, and you don't want to die on the wrong hill politically, you have to be willing to do what Trump does, which is back off the gas. Now, in this particular situation, she burned the boats when she made these allegations. There's no backing off of that. For better or worse, she's going to be fighting this one out in court. I hope that the political juice is worth the squeeze for her, because this is certainly, this could personally, financially ruin her. This is serious stuff that she's opened here. But on something like the airport, that's the kind of thing that you can she could have at any point chosen to back off when she doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down on being an asshole to random people trying to do their jobs. But she decided to go full force forward. And no, I have not seen any indication that that is helping her.
Yeah. And it, in fact, is really, I think, the incident that led a lot of folks who were, as we mentioned earlier, jury open with her. They've sort of tuned it out in the aftermath of that based on what she showed. Now, she's still one of the top 4 contenders for governor. I mean, this has not sunk her candidacy. Let's be clear. It's Nancy Mace, Attorney General Alan Wilson, Lieutenant Governor Pam Yvette, and 5th District Congressman Ralph Norman, who are the 4 top contenders for the governor's office here in South Carolina. So she hasn't knocked herself out of that top tier, but she hasn't done herself any favors either, Dylan.
Yeah, and I do think in the new year, as people turn their attention back to politics, we could see other viable entrants get into this race. I don't think that we're looking at the final field here.
Well, and if you think the Mace drama is crazy, though, I want to take a minute to give an update on the Lieber drama. And I say Lieber, not lemur, like the monkeys at the zoo. We're talking about the Liebers. The Liebers down on James Island, South Carolina. The state senator, Matt Lieber, and his wife, estranged wife at this point, Michelle Lieber, a Charleston County school trustee. They first made news earlier this summer when Michelle Lieber publicly accused her husband, Senator Matt Lieber, who campaigned as a family values conservative, folks. She accused him of having an affair with his political consultant, Rebecca Madsen. She did it publicly. She called Madsen a whore publicly. She said there were others that Rebecca Madsen had been with publicly. Matt Lieber now seeming to confirm at least the allegations of his involvement. But the Liebers, this drama spilled over into Charleston County Court this past week when Michelle Lieber was in court opposite the woman she called a whore, the alleged mistress of her husband. And so we are still trying to figure out exactly what transpired at that hearing. There were some reports coming out of Charleston indicating that Matt Lieber was there. We've been able to confirm the senator himself was not present at this court hearing, but it is a soap opera, Dylan. It's and Matt Lieber, you mentioned earlier today, has only just now, months after this news broke, started to dip his toe back into trying to pretend like it never happened, give some political commentary.
Yeah, he's doing some, generic GOP political messaging on his Facebook now. Obviously, the legislature will come back to Columbia soon. And so he will have to, he's not giving up his office. So he's going to be resuming his duties as a state senator. I don't know if there will be any more horizontal lobbying this session. But yeah, he's dipping his toe back into engaging with the public. He had really gone radio silent there for a while.
Well, we mentioned the court hearing that happened earlier this week in Charleston with Michelle Lieber and Rebecca Madsen. But there were other developments. Matt Lieber, in his commentary on that hearing, made a reference to his wife's bond and the conditions of her bond. Now, his wife, in case you missed it, FITSNews reported exclusively earlier this month, one of our biggest political stories of the month, that Michelle Lieber had been arrested and charged with domestic violence against her husband. Apparently, it was a scratch on the arm while she was trying to grab a cell phone or something. A lot of people who saw this grievous wound kind of had a laugh at Matt Lieber's expense because, Andy, you probably got worse than that hanging out with my kids the other night. But at any rate, this was a huge drama. But Matt Lieber now saying that he may go after the bond conditions of his wife over whatever happened in Charleston County Court. Jen, these family court cases, they're nuts.
They're up there. They're
nuts.
Unreal. Yeah.
But this is one that involves not one, but 2 public figures.
Correct.
They're both elected officials here in South Carolina.
Correct.
God, we got to turn this into a reality show. By the way, before we go, and again, I want to thank everybody who tuned in tonight. Jen, I want the record to reflect that I made it through the entire show without once mentioning that I was in a band.
I'm really proud of you.
This is the jar that they have made at the office, folks, for every time I say that I was in a band. I have to put money in there. You can see there's $20 in there.
You're even catching yourself now. Like before I'm proud.
I'm catching myself.
Is mentioning that you weren't in a band your way of mentioning that you were in a band?
Yeah, that counts. That's a buck.
Damn it, I got to pull another dollar out and put it in there. But before we go, folks, one more time, I just want to invite everybody, if you haven't already, now is the time to get your FITSNews subscription, or if you've got one already, gift one to a friend. A special limited time offer between now and the end of Cyber Monday, 50% off an annual subscription. That is our biggest deal of the year, including the Christmas savings. So if you haven't already, if you want to support the kind of investigative work, analysis that we do here at FITSNews, please consider supporting us with your subscription. Again, it empowers everything we do. Unlike the MSM, we're not driven, again, by that nonprofit money, by all that stuff. We are driven by your support as subscribers. That helps us stay independent, helps us stay unapologetic, and it helps us to continue to produce content just like this. So thanks to everyone who subscribes. Thanks to my whole team for an incredible month of bringing you the news, and we will catch you next time on the Month